Alright, in this class we're going to learn about PHP Myadmin and how to move around in it, because I know a lot of web developers, when they first start with PHP Myadmin, they look at it and they go, I don't know what any of this means. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to walk you through PHP Myadmin using my WAMP server. So I click the little WAMP icon at the bottom there, and I click PHP Myadmin. You'll notice it brought me to localhost/PHP Myadmin. On the right we have all of our databases. We've got exam, information schema, performance schema, MySQL, swap, test. Some of these, they will be there by default. For example, information, performance, and I believe MySQL is in there by default. Up here, we have how we move around. So if we click databases, we've got all of our different databases in here. Click SQL. So in here, we can actually write our actual SQL commands, which is pretty nice to have that ability. We're also going to learn how to do this in PHP so we can do it from our actual script, not just from the management side. We click on status. It says here, the MySQL server has been running for 6 days, 16 hours, 6 minutes, and 34 seconds. Tells you when it started up. Server works as master in replication process, etc., etc., etc. Tells you the different types. Has some more information down here. Information received, sent, total, max, aborted, total. We've got all sorts of information in here, to be honest. Until you get into actual server handling, a lot of this not really that important, not for what we're going to be doing right now anyways. Then we have our binary log. Again, this really isn't too terribly important. We've got our processes, so if your SQL server is running too many processes, you can actually kill that process to speed it up. When you do that, know exactly what you're doing. If there's something weird in here, I would ask your server provider, whether it's HostGator or someone else, and possibly even just Google the answer yourself. In here we have privileges. So we've got a bunch of different usernames in here, right? We've got user, for example, Caleb. He's allowed on localhost. There is a password, and the privileges are all privileges. We can edit the privileges, we can export them, we can create a new user as well. When we do this, we have our username, so we could have tcwd. Host, we're going to want to select localhost, and this is usually the case in pretty much every web host. Password, no password, I would never choose that. Always use a password. Make sure this password is very strong. For this purpose, we're going to set the password as password123. So just so you know, it looks like this. Password123. We can also generate a password, and this will generate a very strong password for you. My suggestion, use this. The chances that someone is going to guess that password or brute force that password, very, very, very low. Chances are it's never going to happen. Database user, we could create a database. We can grant all privileges on the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to grant all privileges on wildcard name, meaning that this user that we're creating is able to access all the databases in PHP Myadmin. In here you see the privileges that we went over in the cPanel. This one has a lot more. For learning purposes, just click check all. If you're actually going to publish your website, and let's say you don't ever use drop, get rid of it. Don't use it. This way, if there is a malicious user out there and he knows what he's doing, he's going to try to hack your website through SQL, and he's going to try to drop a table, which means it pretty much get rid of a table. We'll cover tables and rows and stuff later. But if he's going to drop some of your database and mess up your entire website, if he tries that and this user isn't allowed to do that, he cannot drop that website. It's not going to work in his favor. So again, that's another security thing. Remember, anything you don't use, get rid of. But for now, check them all. Might as well. This way we don't run into any problems in the future. Then we have our resource limits. We can limit the user, max queries per hour, so how many searches or how many times it can get information or insert information, how many updates, how many connections, max user connections. We can set all that. This stuff will make a lot more sense once we get a lot more familiar with SQL. For now, leave those to 0, and that will actually remove the limit as it says up here, and click create user. You'll see up here that it created our SQL. This is our SQL code. and this looks a little bit intimidating. It really isn't once we get to know what everything is doing here. And then we come back to this page. Again, we can just click privileges, and you'll see that our user is down there. So this is our username. Our password is what we set it to be, so password 123. The host is localhost, and we have all privileges. Now if we click export, we can export our databases from the server so that we can move it from one server to another. Let's say you didn't like your host you're at and you wanted to move to HostGator. You can export your database and all the tables and all the information in it, and then you can import it. We'll touch on import in just a moment. When we export, we can quickly export it, and this will do all the minimal options. I don't suggest doing this. Then there's custom. Custom, you're going to want, let's select test. That's the database we want. We don't need to change any of this. Our format, we've got different formats in here. I'd stick with SQL. This way importing it is pretty easy. Object creation options. What we want is we want to click this, add drop table, view, procedure, function, event statement, meaning it's going to drop the tables and it's going to recreate them. It's a good thing. Scrolling back up here, let's look at format specific options. You might want to include this if you want to include the timestamp when the databases were created, last updated, and checked. I like this. This gives me a little bit more control over the server. I know when everything is being created, when it's being last updated, and when it's being last checked. And once you have all that, you can just click go. And you see down here, it's downloading localhost, 4th copy. As you see, I've downloaded my database at least 4 times. So let's scroll back up, let's click import. The file that we downloaded there was the SQL file. When we want to upload it, we click choose file, and we can select different stuff in here. Partial import. Allow the interruption of import in case script detects it is close to the PHP timeout, meaning if your database is huge and your PHP settings only allow you to update something or upload a file for 2 minutes and it's going on 2 minutes, PHP is automatically going to stop this, but SQL is going to start it up again so that it can get the rest of the file uploaded. Your format, I'd stick with SQL, and SQL compatibility mode, none should be good. Do not use auto increment for 0 values, and then you click go, and it will update your server. Essentially, it will create your database for you. We've got different variables in here. There's quite a few actually. We're not going to probably go over any of them actually. Right now we're going to go over some of them individually, like auto increment, offset, things like that. These are the character sets for your server. I guess not that really big of a deal for us right now. We've got more. We've got engines, replication, synchronize, and settings. Let's click settings. We can manage our settings, features, SQL queries, navigation frame, mainframe, import, export, things like that. Now let's see what happens when we click on our database. So we have localhost up here. It says test. That's our database. We have a table. In table we have column A. In here we have a type, the collation, the attributes, null, default, extra actions, and actions, things like that. Let's go back to it real quick. We can browse it, we can check the structure of it, we can search in it, we can insert into it, we can empty it, we can drop it. Well, let's see what happens when we empty it, truncate it. We're going to go OK, click browse. Well, there's nothing in there, so it didn't really do anything. What if we click drop? That table all of a sudden no longer exists. Drop is the term in SQL for deleting. We drop a table, we delete a table. To create a table, we can go create table on database test, table name, number of columns, we'll just go with 1 right now. Table name, column, we'll just call it call name, type, integer, variable character, text, date, tiny integer, small integer, medium integer, etc., etc. It goes on and on and on. We got different string types. There are differences between all of them. Some are very little, some are not so little. Tiny integer is, for example, just a few numbers, 1, 2, 3. Big integer is like 20 numbers, which gets into like hundreds of trillions and things like that. So the length for this, let's go 19. Default, we can set the default value to be, I don't know, 10. So every time we insert something in here and we don't specify that anything should be inserted into this, the column name value will be 10. We can select the current timestamp, select null. We want null. Collation, I leave this empty. Attributes, empty, null, yes. Here's the trick. When we select default to be null, also select this to be null. Index, there are 4 different kinds. There's a full text, an index, unique, and primary. Unique means that no other entry in this table can have the same value. So if we had this as a food, and we said apple, and we tried to insert another row in here that had the same value of apple, this would not work. It has to be unique. Index means it's a popular search, and your SQL is actually going to speed this up and look through it much quicker. We'll touch on index a little bit more. This is a very, very important one to make your server run a little bit faster. So let's say index yes. Auto increment means if we inserted one row, it's going to start at 0. A second row is 1, third row is 2, fourth row is 3, etc., etc. It will automatically increment this value. So here, value is null. The first one would be 0. Second one is 1, etc., etc. Comment, we can write comments in here. This is a test table, something like that. We can write table comments, test table, storage engine. I usually stick with InnoDB. A lot of other people like to use MySQL. Collation, blank, partition definition, blank. You guys can set that stuff if you know what you're doing. If you don't, just leave it blank. So it says our table was created. Nothing shows up. Let's just reload this page. Table name here. Now if we browse in it, we've got our column. That's our column name. Let's go back. We can search in it. We can drop it. We can empty it, etc., etc. So let's browse. And we notice up here that our comment is there. Test table. We can write a little note to ourselves to know exactly what it is if we want to, secretly encrypt it. If we just call this table A, we could write a comment in there saying that table A is for user IDs or something like that. Now let's look at creating our first row. To do this, down here, we can add one column. I guess we can add any column. We can add 10 columns. One column, we can select at the end of the table, at the beginning of the table, or after a certain column name. So let's go at beginning of the table. Column name, we'll call this new call. Set this to a variable character. This has a maximum of 255 characters. So 255. Default. Yeah, let's set a default. Awesome. Can it be null? Yes, it can be null, meaning it does not have to have that in there. Index, we're not going to set index because we're not going to look this up too often. Comment, row comment. And auto increment is off because we don't want it to increment. So now we have a new column in here. The dotted underline means that there is a comment, and when we hover over it, we're going to see the title. It says row comment. Now, we've also got this option. We can select anything from our table name, that's the database we're in. Then we put a where clause in there. We're going to touch on this individually a lot more in the future. Don't have to know what this is. I'm just trying to walk you through what PHP Myadmin looks like. We can insert information in here. Remember Nucol? The row that we just made, its default value was awesome. It's already filled in there for us. And then column name. This one was an integer. It says integer, maximum 19 characters. So let's write 10010100101. And we can actually put 2 things in here. We're actually just going to put 1. So here we have our first error. 1 row inserted, warning. Number 1264, out of range value for column name at row 1. So now when we go to browse and we actually have a row in here, then what this is going to do is it's going to display our information. So we have our column name. So we have column name. That's our value in there. That's not what we wrote. That was actually what the error was about. Then we have new call. That's awesome. We didn't write that. That was just by default. So this right across here is a row. We've got our columns that go up and down. And the whole thing is our table. So clicking on structure, this whole thing again is our table called table name. And we can insert, we can export, import. We've got operations in here. Um, we're not really going to go over too much more about this. I don't want to really overload you with everything. So just going back to where we started here, we've got our databases on the left, got our operations up here. If we select a database on the left, we have more operations, and we can perform these on this particular database. So we're on the test database. All of these will now apply to test. We can also select a different database. This is just a swap application I was making there where you can have suggestions, trades, users, things like that. So moving back to test, well, we can edit our search or query. We can export our table. And this will export all of our tables from the test database, not including the database though. So if you go to export it and upload this into another database, it's not going to work unless you created the database yourself. Anyways, I think that is enough for PHP Myadmin right now. We are going to learn a lot about it, and we're going to get very familiar with it. And we will be going through PHP Myadmin a lot more often. We're also going to learn how to directly inject SQL in here by writing the appropriate statements that SQL can understand, so the syntax. We're also going to learn how to do it through PHP. I guess that's all for now. If you are confused about what's going on here, join the club. A lot of other people are confused with PHP Myadmin at first. Once you start using it, you start gaining more experience with it, you start logging a few more hours with PHP Myadmin. The concept of databases with tables and columns and rows and all that stuff gets to be very familiar, and all of a sudden it is not confusing at all. But to get there, we have to learn things like the syntax, how to insert information, how to query information, how to select particular information, things like that. And we're going to go over all that very soon. For now, this is a quick introductory to PHP Myadmin. There's no homework or anything. I do strongly suggest, though, if you have PHP Myadmin through either your cPanel or through your localhost server, go to PHP Myadmin and just look around. You don't have to change anything, you just have to kind of learn your way around. If you're starting to feel a little bit comfortable, a little more confident, you can try to create users, you can create a database on here, and you can actually create a user and assign it to a new database, just like we did in our cPanel. If you're not that comfortable, you're not that confident in what you're doing yet, you don't have to touch it. I just want you to go around, take a look, kind of get familiar with how it looks.